For over a century, California's most dangerous fault lines have ticked relentlessly toward a rupture. Yet, nearly half of them are now officially overdue. And the next big one could claim thousands of lives and cost over $200 billion. Officials reassure us that help will come, but documented plans quietly admit you may be on your own for 2 harrowing weeks. If the warnings are this severe, why aren't you hearing the truth from those in charge? The real story of what the government isn't telling you starts now. Along the backbone of California, a silent pressure builds beneath the surface. Trench logs from the Carrizo Plain show 7 massive ruptures since the year 1000, the last in 1857, the Fort Tejon earthquake. That event tore open nearly 225 miles of the San Andreas Fault in a matter of minutes, shifting the ground by up to 7 meters. Since then, the fault has remained locked, accumulating strain for over 165 years, longer than the average interval between such quakes. Radiocarbon dating and sediment records confirm this is not an isolated pattern. The northern San Andreas last broke in 1906, devastating San Francisco. The Hayward Fault, running beneath the East Bay, last ruptured in 1868. Its historical cycle averages 140 to 160 years. Today, both faults are overdue by decades. Across California, nearly half of all mapped faults have now exceeded their mean recurrence intervals. This is not a local anomaly. Comparative studies show that globally, fewer than 1 in 5 faults reach this overdue status. In California, it's nearly 1 in 2. Each year, without a major rupture, adds to the pent-up energy stored along these fault lines. Paleoseismic evidence, trench walls sliced through ancient riverbeds and sag ponds, shows that large earthquakes here do not always follow a predictable schedule. Some intervals are short, others stretch far longer, but the pattern is unmistakable. Stress builds, then releases in sudden, violent bursts. The science is precise about what has happened, but uncertain about when it will happen again. Dr. Thomas H. Jordan, former director of the Southern California Earthquake Center, warns the San Andreas doesn't keep a calendar, but the clock is ticking and the strain is real. Recent models suggest that the next rupture may not be limited to a single fault segment. In 1857, the rupture cascaded across multiple sections of the San Andreas. New research shows that future quakes could span even greater distances, linking faults and multiplying consequences. The southern San Andreas, in particular, has not produced a major event since the early 1700s. Over 3 centuries of strain, far surpassing its average recurrence window. The Hayward Fault, too, sits beneath densely populated cities. Its last major slip, now more than 150 years in the past. Official probability models like UCER3 put the odds of a magnitude 7 or greater quake on the San Andreas at 7% in the next 30 years for Southern California, 31% for the state as a whole. Yet, these numbers carry a quiet warning. The models emphasize uncertainty, not comfort. Faults can remain quiet for longer than average, but every year past the mean is another year of accumulating risk. The evidence from trench logs, slip measurements, and radiocarbon dating all point in the same direction. A geological clock winding down with no way to know the exact moment it will strike. A rupture on the southern San Andreas Fault, measuring between magnitude 7.8 and 8.2, would unleash destruction on a scale not seen in modern California. Federal models, including the FEMA Jesus software and USGS shakeout scenarios, calculate that such an event could kill several thousand people in the first hours alone. Hospitals would be inundated beyond capacity. Emergency services, already stretched thin, would face more than 1 million people suddenly displaced, forced from their homes by collapsed buildings or fires. Economic losses would surpass $200 billion, even before counting the indirect costs that ripple through the region for years. Damaged highways, rail lines, and airports would sever supply chains, halting commerce across the West. Power outages and ruptured water mains would leave entire neighborhoods in darkness and without safe drinking water. The HAZUS model, used by FEMA to guide disaster planning, projects that hundreds of thousands of residential units would be uninhabitable. In Los Angeles County alone, over 300,000 people could lose their homes in a single day. Scenes from past earthquakes. Northridge in 1994, Loma Prieta in 1989, offer only a glimpse of what these models predict. The scale multiplies when the rupture runs for hundreds of miles, shaking multiple cities at once. Fire is expected to break out in dozens of locations, overwhelming fire departments and spreading unchecked through neighborhoods where water pressure drops to zero. The Haywired scenario, focused on the Bay Area, estimates that a major quake on the Hayward Fault could destroy or severely damage more than 400,000 buildings, with direct losses topping $100 billion. Official projections often stop short of the worst-case numbers. Internal reviews and unpublished sensitivity analyses suggest that actual losses could be even higher, especially if multiple fault segments rupture together, or if the quake strikes during peak business hours. Dr. Egil Hauksson of Caltech has warned that these scenario models, while conservative, are based on the best available science and should not be dismissed. The numbers are not just theoretical. They represent the lives, homes, and livelihoods at risk across California's urban core, waiting for the moment when the ground finally slips. Rows of brick storefronts line the heart of California's oldest neighborhoods, their facades unchanged for generations. Inside, the walls are unreinforced masonry, bricks stacked without steel or modern anchors. These buildings, known as URMS, number in the tens of thousands across the state. In Los Angeles alone, city inventories list more than 12,000 such structures. In San Francisco, over 3,000 remain, many clustered in the Mission District and Chinatown. Decades after engineers first warned of their collapse risk, thousands still stand without seismic upgrades. The same silent threat lurks in soft-story apartments, those familiar 2- or 3-story buildings perched above open parking bays. These are common in neighborhoods from North Hollywood to Oakland, built by the thousands during the post-war boom. When the ground shakes, the open first floor acts like a hinge. In the 1994 Northridge earthquake, nearly every fatal residential collapse involved a soft-story building. Today, Los Angeles lists over 13,500 at-risk soft-story apartments. San Francisco's mandatory retrofit program began with 5,000, but hundreds remain untouched. A third category, non-ductile concrete buildings, includes mid-century offices, hospitals, and schools constructed before modern codes. These structures, erected between the 1950s and 1970s, lack the steel reinforcement needed to flex during violent shaking. Engineers estimate more than 1,500 of these buildings remain in Los Angeles County alone. Many are still in daily use, their addresses known to city officials, but rarely disclosed to residents. Professor Jack Moule of UC Berkeley, a leading expert on seismic safety, warns, "We know where the worst risks are. The data is public, but progress is slow, and every year that passes, the odds get worse." The clustering of these vulnerable buildings in working-class and immigrant neighborhoods means predictable casualties are built into the city's fabric. The next major quake will not strike randomly. It will expose these mapped weaknesses, block by block, street by street. When the ground ruptures, the collapse of buildings is only the beginning. Buried beneath city streets, the true lifelines of urban life, power, water, and communications are bound together in a fragile network. A single failure can trigger a cascade that disables entire regions for days, sometimes weeks. In California, utility contingency models, rarely released to the public, forecast grid downtime of 7 to 12 days in the hardest hit zones after a magnitude 7.8 or greater quake. The reason lies in the system's design. A handful of key substations and central water mains serve millions. If even one suffers catastrophic damage, the blackout can spread across counties. The 1994 Northridge earthquake knocked out power to over 2 million customers, but most service was restored within 3 days. The next big one will be different. High voltage transmission corridors cross the San Andreas Fault at multiple points. A major rupture is expected to topple towers, sever lines, and isolate entire SOZO substations. Water mains, often routed along the same corridors, are likely to shear apart, draining reservoirs and leaving neighborhoods dry. In Los Angeles, the Department of Water and Power's internal risk assessment names 3 central pumping stations as single points of failure. Their loss would leave over 1 million residents without running water for at least a week. Communication networks are equally exposed. Fiber optic cables and cell towers depend on the same power lines and access roads as other utilities. During a major quake, battery backups last hours at best. If roads are blocked by debris or collapsed overpasses, repair crews cannot reach damaged nodes. A senior resilience analyst from Southern California Edison, speaking anonymously, explained, "Our models show that if we lose 2 or 3 critical substations, restoration timelines jump from days to over a week. If water mains go too, the situation compounds. No water means no cooling for power stations, and emergency generators can't run indefinitely without fuel resupply. Every system is interdependent. Water cannot flow without power. Hospitals cannot function without both. Without communication, coordination among emergency responders breaks down. The domino effect ensures that even a localized failure can escalate into a regional crisis. For residents, the reality is stark. The lights may not come back on for days, taps could run dry, and cell phones may go silent, all at once. In this environment, the city is not just damaged, it is cut off, forced to survive in isolation until the most basic lifelines are painstakingly restored. Flames are as certain as aftershocks. In every major California earthquake, fire has followed within minutes. Broken gas lines, toppled electrical transformers, and ruptured fuel tanks ignite dozens of simultaneous blazes. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake turned a morning disaster into a 3-day inferno, destroying more than 28,000 buildings, most by fire, not by shaking. Today, the risk is even greater. State emergency planners estimate that a southern San Andreas event could spark more than 1,600 separate fires in Los Angeles County alone. Firefighters expect to be outnumbered and outmatched. Water mains, already fractured by the quake, will run dry. Hydrants will sputter as pressure drops to zero. In the haywired scenario modeled for the Bay Area, nearly half of all projected fire ignitions would burn unchecked for hours, many for days. The dominoes fall fast. As flames leap from block to block, emergency services are paralyzed by collapsed roads and gridlocked escape routes. Flooding is the next threat. California's hills and valleys are dotted with aging reservoirs and earthen dams, many built before modern seismic codes. When a fault ruptures beneath these structures, the results can be catastrophic. Dam breach models show that a failure at even one major reservoir, like the Upper San Fernando or San Pablo, would send a wall of water racing through downstream neighborhoods. In 1971, the Lower Van Norman Dam came within inches of collapse after the Sylmar quake. Today, more than 1 million people live in mapped inundation zones below at-risk dams. The state's own hazard maps, rarely publicized, outline the neighborhoods that would be swept away in minutes if containment fails. Even where water does not flood, the ground itself can turn to liquid. Liquefaction zones, mapped by the USGS, cover vast stretches of the Bay Area and Los Angeles Basin. In these pockets, shaking transforms soil into a thick, unstable slurry, swallowing streets, tilting buildings, and rupturing buried pipelines. In the 1989 Loma Prieta quake, entire blocks of San Francisco's Marina District sank and twisted as the ground lost its strength. The haywired scenario projects that over 50,000 properties in the Bay Area alone are at risk of severe ground failure. Buried infrastructure, sewers, water mains, gas lines will buckle and snap, compounding every other disaster. A major earthquake does not just break buildings, it multiplies hazards, turning a single rupture into a cascading crisis. Fires, flooding, and ground failure will unfold at the same moment, overwhelming every plan and every line of defense. In this chaos, the city becomes unrecognizable, not just damaged, but transformed by the forces that no agency can contain. Emergency managers across California have long known what official pamphlets rarely spell out. In the aftermath of a magnitude 7.8 quake, help will not arrive quickly. FEMA's own guidance, buried in internal scenario reports, states that residents in the hardest hit zones should expect to be on their own for up to 2 weeks. This is not a hypothetical exercise. After action reviews from the Great Shakeout and Cascadia Rising drills consistently found that highways, bridges, and runways would be crippled or impassable for days. Fuel convoys, medical teams, and search and rescue units would be stalled outside the impact zone, waiting for debris to clear and aftershocks to subside. A senior municipal emergency manager, speaking on background, described the reality. "We plan for 14 days without meaningful outside assistance. That's not a worst-case number, it's our baseline." Federal and state agencies have quietly adopted this standard, advising local departments to stockpile supplies and train for complete isolation. But even the best prepared cities face friction. Mutual aid agreements meant to bring in fire engines, ambulances, and specialized rescue crews from neighboring counties have limits. When every jurisdiction is overwhelmed, no one has resources to spare. During the Northridge earthquake, mutual aid took 3 days to reach some neighborhoods. In a true Big One, the gap will be longer. FEMA Region 9's own continuity plans warn that communications failures could delay situation reports for 48 to 72 hours, pushing back the mobilization of federal aid. Logistics bottlenecks, collapsed overpasses, damaged airports, fires blocking access are expected to keep outside help at bay. Internal documents show that in the most severe scenarios, local emergency services will exhaust their capacity within 72 hours. After that, neighborhoods will be left to improvise. The stark truth: for at least 2 weeks, survival will depend on what you have, who you know, and how well your community can adapt. In the words of one emergency coordinator, there is no cavalry coming, not soon enough. Buried in council minutes and budget ledgers is a story deliberate neglect. In 2013, San Francisco passed a law requiring seismic retrofits for nearly 5,000 soft-story buildings. More than a decade later, over 600 still have not complied. 4 deadline extensions since 2017, the most recent in March 2024, have left tens of thousands of residents living in structures flagged as high risk. Internal memos from the Department of Building Inspection, released under public records laws, warn that these delays put over 50,000 people in danger for at least 2 more years. Meanwhile, city spending on seismic upgrades has fallen by nearly a fifth since 2021. In May 2024, the Board of Supervisors redirected $4.2 million from seismic enforcement to general housing programs, even as inspection staff was cut by 40%. Los Angeles tells a similar story. The city's 2015 retrofit ordinance targeted 13,500 vulnerable buildings, but as of April 2025, nearly 2,000 have yet to submit retrofit plans. The Seismic Fund has shrunk by $9.3 million in just 2 years, with funds diverted to other priorities. The City Controller's audit from March 2024 found a backlog of 4,200 overdue seismic inspections, and average wait times now stretching past 18 months. Internal emails between building officials openly admit they cannot guarantee compliance or risk reduction with current staffing levels. Statewide, the Shake Alert early warning system faces an uncertain future. The 2023 to 2024 budget slashed its funding by more than half, threatening the expansion of this life-saving network in the Bay Area and Los Angeles. Staff memos warn that without restored funding, key infrastructure and secondary networks will remain unprotected. Whistleblowers have tried to sound the alarm. Mark L. Hinton, a former San Francisco building inspection official, resigned in protest, submitting a dossier of emails and memos documenting missed inspections and repeated council deferrals. In February 2024, a formal complaint alleged that city supervisors routinely deprioritized hazard mitigation to avoid unpopular rent hikes. One leaked memo warned senior staff that further delays would mean substantial, avoidable loss of life. The public record is unambiguous. Votes, budget lines, and internal warnings all point to a pattern. Safety measures are postponed, funds are redirected, and the risks are accepted until the ground finally moves. According to USGS scenario models, a magnitude 7.8 rupture on the San Andreas Fault could displace over 1 million people and cause more than $200 billion in losses. As documented, tens of thousands of unreinforced and outdated buildings remain unretrofitted, despite repeated warnings in municipal records and state audits. Emergency planning documents confirm that federal and state aid may not reach affected urban centers for up to 14 days, leaving residents without water, power, or outside help. Council minutes and whistleblower memos reveal years of deferred action on seismic safety, with funding for early warning systems repeatedly slashed, while the precise timing of the next major earthquake remains unknown. The vulnerabilities and the policy decisions behind them are a matter of public record. The undeniable fact is this: the risk has been measured, the consequences modelled, and the gaps in preparedness are neither accidental nor hidden. What remains uncertain is not the threat, but whether the next disaster will unfold as predicted or be met with the readiness that has so far been deferred.